SAT number 17. This is the QAS test from April 2019, and we're going to be looking at the fourth passage from this test, just going through real quickly, helping you to understand it a little bit more if you're struggling with the comprehension, give you a little take on how I would break it down, how I would look at it, so that we can jump into the answer choices and figure out how to solve those. Alright, so let's jump in. So first thing what we'll do is look at this little blurb here. This basically says, this is from Edmund Burke, published in 1790. He's a British politician and scholar. In 1789, the French formed a new governmental body known as the National Assembly, ushering in the tumultuous period of political and social change known as the French Revolution. So this is Burke responding to the French Revolution. Good. So this is kind of a hard one. This is the historical passage. Some of the language is a little bit challenging, but let's see if we can break it down and simplify it for you. So let's start with the first paragraph here. This basically says, to make a government requires no great prudence, settle the seat of power, and the work is done. Okay? So the first claim that he gives here is basically to make a government is pretty easy. If you just have a king or a monarch or someone in charge, you just settle the seat of power, boom, they're in charge, everything is going well. The second part says to give freedom is still more easy. You don't need to guide anybody, you just let go of the reign. So here he's saying power is easy because if you just put someone in charge, teach obedience, you have them do whatever you want. Then he's saying freedom is easy, you just let people do whatever they want, you don't have to guide them. But to form a free government, that is hard because you have to temper together these opposite elements. So liberty, allowing people to have freedom, and at the same time allowing order in governments. Right? So he says to do that, you need to have thought, deep reflection, a sagacious, powerful, and combining mind. So this basically means that leaders who want to lead a free government, basically they need to have a certain kind of character and a certain kind of intellect in mind. And he says, I do not find these in the National Assembly. Again, the National Assembly being here, right, the governmental body, that the French, the newly formed governmental body. So then what he's saying down here is we have a little bit where he talks about how the leaders instead are auctions at popularity, or they're bidders at an auction of popularity, which basically means they're flattering the people. Instead of leading the people, what they're doing is they're engaging in this sort of popularity contest, trying to flatter the people, come up with the most splendid proposals, as opposed to leading, right? Then he says here, basically, if anybody here were to propose sort of a more moderate solution, then they're going to be doubted, they're going to be outbid by the competition, and that moderation is going to be stigmatized. Right? So that's the first paragraph here. Basically, he starts off by saying, having a government with perfect control, easy. Having a government with a lot of freedom, easy. Having the two together is very hard. It requires a certain kind of character. The National Assembly doesn't have that character. Instead, what they have is this sort of popularity contest where any moderate position is going to get passed over. Then we go to paragraph 2. So he starts by asking this question, am I so unreasonable as to see nothing at all that deserves commendation in the indefatigable liberties of this assembly? This is basically him saying, am I being too harsh on them? Is there really nothing that they're doing good? And he says, no, I don't deny that among the infinite number of acts of violence and folly, some good may have been done. And this is basically him saying, then he goes on by saying, those who destroy everything will certainly destroy some grievance. So this is him basically, he's answering his question sort of in a sarcastic way by saying, no, I do think they've done something good, because when you destroy everything the way they've done, certainly you're going to destroy the good along with the bad, right? Or the bad along with the good. So, but he says to give them credit for that is not good, right? Basically, it's not right. He comes down here to say these improvements of the National Assembly are superficial rather than fundamental, right? So basically, here he's saying he is making the case that nothing good has come out of the National Assembly. He's making it sort of in a backhanded way by saying, well, they have done some good because if you destroy everything, you're going to destroy some bad things. But ultimately, that's moving to his point that there's almost nothing positive to say about the National Assembly. The improvements they've made are very superficial and surface level, but their errors are really fundamental. So then we get to the last paragraph here. So this is basically saying, whatever they are, I wish my countrymen rather to recommend to our neighbor the example of the British Constitution than to take models from them for the improvement of their own. It might take a moment to understand what this sentence is saying, but he's saying, I wish my countrymen, right? Countrymen are the people from his country, which would be the British, that they would recommend to our neighbors is going to refer to the French, the example of the British Constitution, rather than to take models from the French for the improvement of our own, for the improvement of the British. right? So it's a little challenging to unwind because you have a lot of pronouns here, and it's hard to track what's being said about what. But essentially, this is Burke saying, instead of the British looking at the French and looking at their new government and saying, yeah, we should do something like that, he's saying instead what his countrymen or what the British should do is to sort of recommend or advocate that the French adopt a sort of constitution like their own, or at least look at their constitution as a model for their own. And this sort of opens up the third paragraph where he continues to talk about how good the Constitution is, right? Here he says, there are some bad things about the Constitution, but those are not because of the Constitution themselves, but because of the way that people act about it, the behaviors that people make, right? The way people respond to it, and not the thing itself. He's basically saying down here that we should follow the example of our ancestors, right? Basically that what guided them was sort of this caution, right? This guarded circumspection, basically this humility where they didn't think that they knew everything. They knew that human nature is fallible. They knew that corruption is the usual way that things go. So they created this whole system in Constitution where that humility is inscribed in the Constitution. I like this line here, not being illuminated with the light of which the gentlemen of France tell us they have got in so much abundance, right? So basically, he's basically saying his forefathers, the British forefathers, they were not illuminated with this light, right? They weren't so enlightened like the French think they are in deciding to form this new government. Instead, they realized the ignorance and fallibility of mankind. So he basically continues by saying the British Constitution is what we need. We need to preserve that, right? Rather than sort of follow the French in their new political design. So the third paragraph, again, is sort of just praising the Constitution for the fact that it's a solid foundation, for the fact that it takes into account human nature and human ignorance, and it's a better alternative, or it's a better solution to governance than the French, than the National Assembly, which the French have adopted. And he's sort of saying, don't be seduced by all the romance and the charisma of the movement. Instead, you should understand the importance and the value of the British Constitution. So that's really this whole passage here. I hope that helped a little bit. And at this point, now we're ready to jump into the answer choices.